We live in an age of shouting, but at our best, Americans argue out our differences, pushing ourselves compromise by compromise to a better place. That's why at NorCal News Now, we believe in a different kind of political talk show. On NorCal News Now, we welcome activists and opinion leaders, office holders, and candidates from local city council members to top statewide and nationwide office seekers. We talk to them like they're humans, and we expect them to leave their talking points at the door and talk to us and our audience like we're humans too. We believe in unvarnished, in-depth, wide-ranging discussions on a whole host of different topics. Handmade in Northern California, our show is not actually handmade. We make it with professional cameras and microphones like every other broadcast show. We are, after all, not cave people. You can find NorCal News Now on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, our website, on your favorite podcast feed, and on ancient communication technologies like smoke signals and television, but not smoke signals. I think by this point you can see we're a little bit different. So give us a shot. NorCal News Now, a political talk show at the intersection of politics and real life. Support for NorCal News Now comes from David Green, your Chico Edward Jones financial advisor at 2101 Forest Avenue, Suite 120. Additional information is available at edwardjones.com. Edward Jones, making sense of investing. Member SIPC. Additional hosting for this special episode of NorCal News Now, showcasing the Chico City Council Candidates Forum, is provided by the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Congregation Beth Israel in Chico, California.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 Chico City Council Candidate Forum on Social and Fiscal Issues. I'm Mike Richmond, your moderator for tonight's event and the host of the NorCal News Now podcast. We're joining you tonight from Congregation Beth Israel in Chico. CBI, along with NorCal News Now and the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee, are teaming up to present this event to you tonight. In a few moments, we're going to go over the ground rules and meet the candidates who are participating in our forum. But first, I'd like to ask Rabbi Sarah Abrams of CBI to come up and offer an invocation. Sarah.
I'd also like to welcome everyone on behalf of CBI. So welcome to our congregation. Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, God of our mothers and fathers, let us join this evening in the spirit of love and understanding, that we may listen to one another and learn from one another. We give thanks for the blessing of community and the blessing of our leaders, and offer gratitude to those running for city council who have shown their willingness to become servants of the public. In Hebrew, that's shlichei tzibur. May each of us have our hearts open and our minds open throughout this evening, and may we leave this room more informed about our city and its potential leaders. So, Spirit of all beings, please bless this forum for the good, the tov. May this meeting seed the change that our city and our society so truly needs. And let us say. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi Sarah. Appreciate that. And also, before we begin, allow me to introduce Alex McDonald. And Alex is the Advocate Administrator for Safe Place at California State University, Chico. Safe Place is part of the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee, which is working with us to host tonight's event. So Alex, come on up.
Hello, everyone. Like Mike said, I'm the representative from the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee. So the members of that committee are Catalyst Domestic Violence Services, both safe places at Chico State and at Butte College, and we have a few other members as well. So I just wanted to explain why we were a part of co-hosting this forum. And so we are here because the statewide theme is voter registration and community engagement. In October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we're here to help participate and to help kind of raise awareness around these issues and how they connect to domestic violence in our community.
Thank you, Alex. And I actually give this right to one mic now. All right. Okay. Well, now, tonight's event's going to have 3 parts. The first is going to cover questions relating to social issues facing the city. And after a short break in the second part, we're going to address fiscal issues. These questions are my own. Finally, I'm going to ask the candidates a few questions from the audience which have been submitted in advance. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question, and we'll randomize the order in which they will respond in turn. Teresa Richmond, to my right, it will act as our timekeeper, and you'll hear a chime when your time is up. So candidates, when you hear that chime, please wrap up the thought that you immediately have. We want to make sure we get to all of the content tonight. I want to caution the audience, please hold all applause until the end of the event. That would be very much appreciated. And I also want to caution our candidates also. Please address yourself to answering our questions and not commenting to one another if you can. The event isn't a debate, as you know. Our purpose is to give each of you the opportunity to express yourselves in front of the voters and express yourselves freely and clearly. The voters can then decide what we think of your responses without reframing or interrogation from me or from your fellow candidates. I know you all know that. I'm just putting that out there. And with that, it's time to meet the 6 candidates who are with us tonight. You'll each, yes, Scott, sorry.
I have a question. Is there anything that keeps us from commenting on things that other candidates have said, or discussing maybe the differences between our positions and the other candidates' positions?
I would prefer you not to, quite frankly. I'd like to have everyone stick to their belief system as much as possible. It just gets too much off the rails too quickly that way, I find.
Thank you.
So if we can, that'd be appropriate, I think. And with that, it's time to meet the 6 candidates who are with us tonight. You're each going to have 1 minute for an opening statement. The order in which you'll do so, like the order in which we're going to answer the questions today, are going to be determined by our very fancy and expensive randomizing system. There you go. Right there. So let's start with our first person for their 1 minute intro, and that is John. John, 1 minute.
Thank you. So can everybody hear me okay? Yep. Wait, I don't need to pick up a mic. So you probably know by now I'm running for city council, and I appreciate this opportunity tonight to discuss with you directly issues that I feel are important for the entire community. Fiscal issues, social issues, issues that affect the everyday quality of life of, everybody who calls Chico their home. I'm with 4 other people that care about Chico as much as I do, and I honor every one of them for being here. You'll obviously hear some diverse opinions, but I respect every single one of those opinions, and I appreciate your time. I think I'm going to stop now because I don't hear a chime, but I'm getting the feeling that I've hit the 1 minute mark.
You're coming up on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's have a great evening.
All right. Next person, please. Who do we have? Rich.
Great, thanks. It is wonderful to be with you here, all of you here tonight. I want to thank NorCal News and Congregation Beth Israel, my fellow candidates, and all of you for joining us tonight in what I hope will be a true conversation. Kate and I moved to Chico 24 years ago. We've raised 2 amazing children here. And in that 24 years, we've really dug into the community that has not only become home, but has become home to our entire family. I spent 10 years on the Bidwell Park and Playground Commission. 3 of those years I chaired that commission. I spent 10 years on the Gateway Science Board of Directors. I spent a couple of years early on with Habitat for Humanity, helping them with PR back before they were building houses. And more recently, I've spent the last 4 years on the Board of Directors for the Torres Community Shelter. all of that experience, that's a chime, all of that experience has led me here, and I'm looking forward to exploring all of our topics tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. All right, next person up is Andrew. Should be on. I hope it's on. Yes.
Now it's on, I think. All right. Ready, set, go. All right, my name's Andrew Coolidge. I've actually been on the city council for the last 4 years. I am often and sometimes the person in the middle of decisions. So in terms of that, I would say that experience-wise, well, first tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in the city of Chico for about 26 years when I started college here. I'm a transplant from the Yuba Sutter area, so my family was originally down there, but my great-grandmother lived in Chico. So spent a lot of time in Chico both as a child and have a business here in town. I run the Chico Home and Garden shows and bridal shows. Beyond that, in terms of serving the community, I've been a school board member for Chico Country Day School, chaired the Internal Affairs Committee for the City Council. I'm also the chair of the Butte County Air Quality Management District, and I've done that for the last 4 years. So proud to be a part of our community, proud to serve our community, and look forward to this night, and thank you for the opportunity.
Wow, good job. That's kind of impressive, actually. All right. Next person. Next. Alex. Oops, sorry. No. Sorry, Alex.
We got to turn it up. We got to get that chime off.
That was a quick minute.
Just keep it going.
Go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
Is this a joke?
No.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Brown. It's such a pleasure to be here this evening. Thanks to NorCal's News Now, CBI, and to the Domestic Violence Awareness Month Committee for having me. I've been in Chico for 10 years, and what I'll say is that what brought me to Chico is the desire to further my education. What allowed me to invest in this community after getting my undergraduate degrees and my master's degree is all of the opportunity to affect change in this community. I've been involved in social services for the majority of my professional career, working in the domestic violence and sexual assault field as a violence prevention expert, as an advocate and counselor, and as a administrator at Chico State, implementing policy around the issues and collaborating with stakeholders that to implement policy in a smart and strategic way. I'm so excited to be here and talking with you about a variety of important issues today, and I look forward to answering these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Scott will be the last one. You're going to go right ahead.
Okay, well, by deduction, I realized I was going to go last. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here, and thanks for having us. So I moved to Chico 40 years ago to attend Chico State. I graduated in 1981 as a geography major, and I loved the town so much, I decided I was just going to stay. Whether or not I had a job. But fortunately, I did end up getting some jobs over the years. I realized really early on that I wanted to give back to my community. So I was on the school board from 2002 to 2006. I served as president and as conservation director for Alta Cal Audubon Society over the course of about 6 years. I'm a bird guy. Was also involved, I was the president of the Chico Association, and I was also the chairperson for the blood drive function of the Realtors Association. I decided in 2016 that something had to be done about what was going on at the national level and is also occurring at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All right, well, I realize as we begin this forum that, of course, we don't have Ken. So I think I'm going to, with the permission of the candidates, let you do 3 minutes per answer instead of 2, if that's okay. I mean, longer is better. I think hopefully everybody will appreciate a longer answer. So we'll do 3 minutes per answer for this, if we can. Okay. So let's start with our first question. Do you have the timer ready there, Teresa?
1 second.
Okay. Well, 3. Yeah, we're doing 3 minutes. Yes. Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, your first question is, and you should be able to see the questions right there on the screen. Hopefully you all can read that well enough, or maybe not, but I'll read them to you anyway. Homelessness affects everyone in our community, and yet there are basic disagreements about how to best address it. Boiling down a complicated question into a simple answer, please tell us your plan to begin solving this issue. And the first person up is... Scott.
Thank you, Will. So since I have 3 minutes, I'll give you the longer answer. I didn't know that much about what was going on with our homeless population when I got into this race. I knew it was an issue because I walk my dog along Lindo Channel every morning. I was seeing more and more camps blossom along the channel, and I thought, wow, it looks like something needs to be done about this. So early on in my campaign, I decided for 48 hours that I was going to go homeless. I left my house in a rainstorm on a Friday afternoon. I trudged down to the Jesus Center about 3 miles away. I had dinner, and then I walked over to the tourist shelter. Spent the night after a 3-hour process of registering into the tourist shelter. I realized right then that the threshold for people to get immediate shelter is very difficult. It's not a low barrier opportunity for people who need immediate shelter. Over the course of the weekend, I learned a lot, I believe, about what homeless people were experiencing, and I went on to investigate it more and more. So, solutions. I don't believe that the solution is persecuting homeless people more. I believe that what we should be doing is finding ways to try to help them salvage their lives. It's not going to work for everyone. Some are, as has been said before, service resistant. There are people within the homeless population, just as there are within the housed population, that have criminal intent. And I think those people need to be dealt with at a different level than the people that truly need help. But for the people that need help, we need to surround them with services like Lisa Courier's 10 Teams of 2. We need something like a day center, because I'm I'm a Chicoan first and foremost, so I recognize that the downtown is not the same place it was years ago. So I believe what we need to do is create a place for those people to go during the day. So a day center. There's one in Tulsa. There's one in Portland. There's one in Chicago. They're all over the country. Reading had proposed one, but didn't approve it. Day center would be a great solution for having a place for people to go instead of the plaza. Low barrier shelters that allow people in the midst of addiction or while they're on a substance, gets them out of the park and out of doorways. So a low barrier shelter that gives them a place to sleep, what's called a wet shelter. 24-hour restrooms. To me, I know that the term no-brainer is a little bit condescending, but to me, if you don't want people going to the bathroom in your rose bushes, you have to provide them with some place to go at night. So,
thank you, Scott. Next, can you have our next person, our next candidate? Is Alex.
Thank you. So just a little bit about my background in social services. I spent 3 years working as a violence prevention and a violence prevention coordinator at Catalyst Domestic Violence Services. And one of the components of my position there was working in our 24-hour emergency shelter for people experiencing domestic violence who had nowhere to go in leaving an abusive relationship. And so they were at risk of experiencing homelessness as a result of leaving an abusive relationship. I also worked with students at the Chico State campus as an advocate and administrator for Safe Place, and spoke with a variety of students who were at risk of experiencing homelessness due to issues of violence in their housing situations. It is very clear to me, based on my experience and based on the research, that there are a variety of reasons why people experience homelessness and are at risk of experiencing homelessness. This is a complicated and complex issue that requires a variety of solutions. And the way that I see that starting is by, or one of the issues that needs to be addressed is the housing crisis that we're experiencing in Chico. We need to ensure the availability of affordable housing stock so that the people who are at risk of experiencing homelessness as a result of medical bills or losing a job do not find themselves on the street because of a lack of access to affordable housing. I also want to caution against policies such as sit and lie and other policies that criminalize homelessness in various ways. Those have been proven to be ineffective and costly, not just ineffective in addressing the issues that they seek to address, but they cost us in law enforcement response, where those resources could be better utilized providing services to those communities. What the research indicates is that housing and service delivery models are the most effective means of addressing homelessness. So I would like to see the city avail itself to funding that's currently accessible and that will become accessible to addressing the issue through development of emergency shelter, transitional housing, and combining those things with service delivery models to provide advocacy for people experiencing homelessness and getting them connected to additional services and support that they need. I'm supportive of the recent declaration of the shelter crisis at the city level, which avails us to some of that funding, or at least a piece of about $5 million that's coming down through the county to support ending the issue of homelessness. Some of the things that I support, Chat Simplicity Village, which will provide housing to about 30 older adults experiencing homelessness and services so that they can transition out of that temporary housing and into more permanent housing. I'm also supportive of 24-hour restrooms, a day center, harm reduction models like a needle exchange, substance use facilities, and low barrier shelters.
Thank you, Alex. Next, John.
Awesome. I guess I get the microphone this time. Well, it is a complicated question, and the answer is not simple. But let me put it to you this way: everybody's got a right to live the way they want to live if they're not infringing on others. And that being said, not every person who's homeless wants help. In fact, I wouldn't even use the term homeless. When the car fire took place in Reading a couple of months ago, instantaneously, without warning, there were 5,000 people homeless. There were 1,100 homes that burned to the ground, so if you figure they were pretty big homes, so you figure about 4 people per house. There were 5,000 people that had no home, no warning, no home. Yet within about a week, if not less, they all had shelter. Every community, including the community of Chico, we raised money, clothing, food, brought them into our homes, did everything we could for this immediate and relatively temporary crisis. That's what I call homeless. If you find yourself on the streets chronically, some part of that is choice, not all of it. I mean, certainly there's people that end up transient from bad events. As it was mentioned earlier, you could find yourself without shelter if you're in a bad domestic situation, things of that nature, and absolutely they need support. But you know what else needs support? The people that just want to be transient. You have a right to be where you want to be when you want to be, but you don't have a right to be that way at my expense. In other words, when I walk out the front door of my house, you don't have a right to sleep at my front door. This is what's going on in Chico right now. I know this firsthand. I have an office in downtown Chico, and I have literally, true story, cleaned up piles of crap a good 20 times. I know that it's not animals doing the pooping because I find paper right in the middle of the pile. Now, I understand that people need a place to go to the bathroom. But, when I'm on the road and maybe I ate the wrong food and I got to go to the bathroom quick, I generally find a bush or, someplace other than somebody's front door. So, that's really just a sign of disrespect. One of the things that I might recommend as a solution is this. There's been a lot of talk about having a congregated center somewhere around the Torrey Center. I think that's an awesome idea. There ought to be places where people can camp with water, electricity, and not be harassed. There ought to be places for that.
Thank you, John.
Sorry.
Nope.
I ran out of time.
Okay.
I could go for 10 minutes.
Next candidate, Rich.
Well, I love that this question came first because it's just that important and because I really feel that I bring a unique perspective to this issue. I mentioned in my opening statement, I've served on the Torres Community Shelter for the past 4 years. I actually was over at Torres this afternoon cooking. We started our involvement with Torres, a group of neighbors and my family serving meals. We've been doing that for 10 years. And then the last 4 years on the board has really given me a great education into the complexity of this issue. It's embedded in the question, and actually the problem that we're facing as a community, I believe, is in the second half of the question, which is trying to come up with a simple answer to what is a complicated problem. And when we try to apply a simple solution to a very complicated problem, we end up in a deeper mess than where we started, I believe. So what would I do? It's a lot of the work that Torres is doing today. It's a lot of the work that Chat is doing today. It's a lot of the work that the Jesus Center is doing today, and Catalyst and others. The organizations, the service providers who are actually doing this work right now, 365 days a year, year after year, those are the organizations that we should be turning to. They're the ones of the expertise. They're the ones who are getting this work done every day. The challenge is that they need more support and they need more collaboration and coordination. So, the things that I would do. We should start, as we just recently have, with the declaration of a shelter emergency. That was the right thing to do. It just took us far too long to make that decision. I'm thrilled that we finally have gotten to that point so that we can move forward with things like Simplicity Village. That's another piece of the solution. It's a creative piece that Chat has brought forward, and we as a community and the City Council should embrace that and move as quickly forward with that as we can. We also need to create a dry center. We need a place for people to go during the day to do things like get clean, go to the restroom, take a shower, recharge their phone, simple basic things that will enable that community, that population to start moving forward on their path to true shelter, to transitional housing and permanent shelter, permanent housing. We also need a detox center, and that will take coordination and collaboration between the city and the county. The last thing that I think we need to focus on is a more fully empowered and supported by the City Council continuum of care. So the continuum of care is the umbrella organization that is in charge, is responsible for providing coordination between service providers and government agencies. They need to be fully supported by the council so that they can do the work that they're designed to do and bring us to a place where the service providers can truly get this kind of work done.
Thank you, Rich. And I believe Andrew.
All right. So this may surprise some people in here, but I was actually the person who agendized both the shelter crisis and the sit-lie ordinance. And the reason why is because I believe we're facing two very different problems. We are facing a criminal transient problem, and we are facing a homeless problem. Our homeless problem, the solutions I think that we are bringing forward at this point in time, and this is across the board, entire council, voted 7-0 to move forward on the relocation of the Jesus Center, the new Renewal Center. It's going to provide 100 extra beds. It's also going to provide a day center that will be much more interactive and also a lot more community services, social services, all in one location. So I think that is a step in the right direction. I also think getting a part of the $4.9 million through the shelter crisis will in fact allow us to move forward on helping some of our service providers in the area. And the council routinely spends over $100,000 a year directly towards putting money towards those various organizations. And then additionally, over the last 3 years, has spent about $1.6 million of either home funds or CDGB funds directly related to housing. So stepping back to the housing crisis that's affecting the entire state of California, it is something that's 40 years in the making. California has made this problem a lot worse by the highest costs in terms of development, the most intricate development requirements found anywhere in the United States, much less anywhere in the world, and a price of land and limited development that adds to those costs. So you go to somewhere like Texas where development is a lot cheaper, average price of the home is around $200,000, getting into a house is certainly a lot easier. The reason why I vote no against every single time the city council tries to raise housing fees, which we have done consistently over the last 4 years, is because I see the price of a home going up in Chico every single time that the city puts forward those housing fees. So Chico actually takes about $60,000 before you break ground on a home. And I can tell you the one thing that Chico, California feds don't do well, they don't build housing well. When Chico went to build the Valley View apartments, which actually happened before I came to council, those units ended up costing $400,000 for every single apartment. 17 apartments at $400,000. Now all of us know in this room you can buy a pretty nice house for $400,000. Makes a lot more sense. So in terms of doing this, we have a very deep-rooted problem, a problem 40 years in the making, a problem that is not going to be solved tomorrow. We need to have a hand up for those who need it. We need to have, I believe, enforcement for those who seek to be criminal transients in our community. But I do believe that's a very definitive, different crowd. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. All righty. Well, we are now going to move on to our second question. And because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, as we heard at the beginning of the forum, we want to ask this question about DV. Certain populations experience the effects of domestic violence differently. If elected to the City Council, please share how you would engage with and increase safety for populations such as families in rural areas, Native American families, immigrants and undocumented people, those with disabilities, and domestic violence survivors who are experiencing homelessness. So first up on this question is John.
I'll get this down. So domestic violence is nasty, nasty business, and anybody who is suffering from domestic violence ought to be able to escape instantly without having to crawl out onto the streets to do it. So I love the fact that we have some organizations that deal with that directly. As a citizen, never mind being a potential council member, I would absolutely be an advocate for more of those type of services. You know, if your choice is be homeless, leave your kids behind, or stay home with your kids and get beat up, that's a pretty nasty choice. And that's a choice that nobody should be forced into making. When I look at the questions, and it's mentioned that, you know, it might be different in undocumented, or rather undocumented people, or those with disabilities, or those who live in rural areas. Really, the answer is kind of sort of the same. You just need to have a longer reach. If somebody, you know, a shelter for those that are victims of domestic violence shouldn't be a place where we check your citizenship. A shelter for somebody who doesn't speak English shouldn't be, you know, a place that they can't find somebody that can communicate with them to get them some help. You know, if you're in a rural spot, that doesn't mean that you know, we have to hike in to get you. There's probably a road. There's probably a way we can rescue you. But the first part of this comes down to really educating the public at large that if you are a victim of domestic violence, that you have a way out, and that way out doesn't involve you crawling out on the streets and maybe putting your children at risk, or even having to leave your children behind. That really turns into kind of a Sophie's choice, and frankly, that's just not cool. And anybody that would have a problem with more support for you know, domestic violence, protection of victims of domestic violence, to me is short-sighted and potentially pretty uncaring. So that's about all I have to say.
Thank you, John. Next up is Alex.
One of the things I've talked about a few times is, and a big part of my platform is expanding our definition of public safety to include not only our police force and our first responders, but our service providers. And actually my most direct exposure to effective partnerships between law enforcement and service providers has been in the domestic violence field. When I was working at Catalyst Domestic Violence Services, they had a program called the DIVERT program, so the Domestic Violence Response Team or Domestic Violence Response Program. The way that that program worked is that if the police were called out to an incident of domestic violence, then they would call an advocate from Catalyst to respond to that incident. And while they investigated the incident, an advocate would be paired with the person who experienced the domestic violence, would be able to provide crisis intervention, would be able to support them with resources, offer them their options, and get them connected to housing support, counseling, and additional services. That is what I would say is a model partnership and a model for how we can utilize service provider partnerships with law enforcement to increase access to services for people who need it and to intervene in a way that is trauma-informed and that supports people who have just experienced massive trauma. There are a variety of other ways that we can address this, and one of the things that also feels important to me is to ensure that our police force is fully trained in evidence-based crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques. Because crisis often accompanies an experience of trauma, those skills are extremely effective in de-escalating crises, specifically related to behavioral health, and again, getting people connected to the services that they need. It's an invaluable set of tools that our police force can utilize in issues related to issues that cause or that are related to crises. I've worked, the majority of my career has been in the anti-violence field, working in domestic violence prevention and response. And what we know is that the most cost-effective approach to these issues is by investing in prevention efforts. I would like to assure that we collaborate with service providers in our community doing prevention work and bringing innovative projects for prevention to the table so that we can invest in that. I would also like to see programs coming out of our service providers and organizations that demonstrate cultural competency, so addressing a variety of diverse communities, because we know that the same services do not apply the same to a range of communities. So I would want to lift up and support those projects. And using my platform and my voice as a leader in this community to raise awareness about the issue of domestic violence within and beyond this community, so that our community can invest in intervening in the issue and providing support and raising awareness for the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Perfect. Next is Rich.
So I think that one of the challenges that we have in this area is that, much like our issues around homelessness, we have organizations that are doing very real, very important work in the community right now, Catalyst being one of them, and there are many others. And the problem, I think, that in our community, like in virtually every community, is that those agencies often, or almost always, are underfunded, understaffed, undersupported by the committee, but the community, as well as by governmental agencies and the government itself. And so I think that we have solutions, not perfect solutions, but we have solutions to these issues already in place in many cases in the community. It's just that those entities, those organizations, aren't as fully supported as they should be. And that really goes back to a part of what is lacking, I believe, right now at the City Council, which is a spirit of collaboration and engagement between the city and the county, as well as the city and a myriad of nonprofit organizations. And I think that we need to turn that narrative on its side or on its head, so that the City Council and the city is truly engaged with the various service providers who are doing this work, so that they are also so the city is a good partner when those agencies are out seeking the funding that they need, so that they can be fully staffed, so that they can have people who are out doing real outreach and doing the work of intervention and response to people in crisis who have suffered from domestic violence or other kinds of violent situations. A couple of specific things. I do believe that we should more fully fund the target team. The target team is the part of the Chico PD where you have a police officer who's paired with somebody who's trained in social services, mental health experts, etc., to do true intervention and to reach out to people who are in crisis. Most often those are people who are homeless, but they're often people who are experiencing other kinds of issues that are complicating their situation, like domestic violence, like mental health crisis. So if we have a model that supports the intervention services actually doing that kind of outreach, then we'll have a better chance of actually interceding in these issues before they reach a crisis point. I also think that we need the de-escalation and implicit bias training should be mandatory with the police force, so that when intervention does take place, it's coming from an informed place on the part of the police force. I think that what that would do is create a true partnership between the Chico PD and the community that to some extent we're lacking right now.
Thank you, Rich. Andrew.
So I'll kind of start backwards here. I will say that Chico PD actually exceeds state standards in terms of the training that they have. I'm not necessarily saying that that's enough. Certainly there's other cities and counties throughout the United States that have more. But we have ensured as a council across the board, again, both sides of the aisle, to make sure that our officers are some of the best trained in the state of California in terms of the hours they have to put in for their de-escalation training, as well as a variety of trainings that they have. So much so that a certain number of our officers are actually going to be leading those trainings in the coming year. When I came into council, well, when I first ran in council in 2012, I can tell you very specifically that everybody thought that the budget was fine. In 2013, we found out that it wasn't. The city of Chico was actually $20 million in the hole. So the council has been, since I took office in 2014, focused on rebuilding that. Some of that has, of course, led us to be deficient in certain areas: roads, community support, parks, things along those lines. So I'd like to see a lot of those restored as we get out of our budget crisis, which we are not yet out of. We are still $4 million in the red in terms of paying back our reserve funds. But I can tell you, over that period of time, the Community Development Block Grant has been used very effectively to fund a variety of organizations, and one of them has been Catalyst. So over the years, both RDA funds, the former redevelopment agency, and both the home and community development block grant funds at the council, we could say CDGB funds, have been used both for the land acquisition for tourist shelter and Catalyst. So, I'd like to see that support continue. I'm very proud to have the number of officers in our community rise from 65 to 95 during the last 4 years. I'd like to see that continue. I do believe the target team is very important, and the expansion of the target team as we move forward. I do think that, Chico finds itself as a very caring community. That's one of the reasons I was drawn to it, both when I was younger and still now with children. So I'd like to see us continue along those lines, continue to support the organizations that help folks locally, and continue to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. And Scott?
Well, I feel blessed to be up here with Alex and Rich. Well, I feel blessed to be here with you all. But Alex and Rich in particular, because of their backgrounds in social services. And I hope to be able to serve with them because I want to be able to rely on them for their depth of knowledge in these fields, because my depth is not in this. But I can tell you that I have some very basic feelings about what creates the situations that we see. And to me, a lot of it goes back to our investment in education. So by investing in early childhood education, preschool, spending money to sort of break that pattern of abuse that happens in families. In Chico right now, we have over 400 unhoused elementary school children. They're essentially homeless. that cannot be a positive for their future as far as their chances of engaging in domestic violence. When we talk about immigrants and people of color, I think the fact that these populations have been so marginalized, especially at the national level, it sends a message that you're not as good as the rest of us. And I think that contributes to the domestic violence issues. I think that it's important that our investment in social service providers includes diversity within the social service network, because it's been proven. I was an outdoor educator for a while. I taught environmental education. And one of the things that we learned is that children learn best from people that look like them. So a Hispanic child is going to learn better from a Hispanic social service provider, or a family who needs help is going to do better with the care of someone who is of their same background than they're going to do with somebody from the outside. Something that we've seen a lot in the news recently is this lack of honor of the victim. So when we fail to recognize the reality that the victim has been through, and we contest what they're saying about what's happened to them, we send a message to a huge population that it's okay to mistreat your spouse or your family. So those are just some basic thoughts that I have about it. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the expertise of these people over here.
Thank you, Scott. All right, we're going to move on to our third question. This is the last question of the segment of the forum. Mental health workers have been available to the police for much of the last year to assist with real-time crisis de-escalation. What other ways can you envision to bring together various parts of available city services to help increase public safety? And Andrew, you're up first.
Public safety is always an issue I'm happy to talk about. So, part of the problem with, and I'll be the first one to admit it, with the real-time crisis de-escalation in terms of having mental health workers work with our officers is it happens during the day, that they only do it during the day. They do it 8 to 5. They're not necessarily there at night when a lot of the problems occur. So I think that is something that we should seek to remedy. And I think that is very important to remedy as we move forward too. And I think that makes sense. I think it makes sense to conservatives. I think it makes sense to liberals, whatever side of the board you're on. If we can prevent a action or a police response from escalating into something out of control, then by all means we should do that. It makes all the sense in the world. In terms of the other things, and again, I would point across the aisle to the council on this as a full body of the council. The other thing that we've done that I think provides an added protection for our community is putting body cameras on all our officers. That has been a very important thing, and we did that over the last couple of years. It took a little longer than I would have liked, but we did have it, and it has come to Chico, and it is not in every city, particularly in the North State. So Chico's kind of leading the charge on that, and I'm happy to see it. So, otherwise we could do a variety of things. I think we can. We're not getting another question, right? We can continue along the safety measures that we have been doing. We can employ more officers in our community. We can get up to the number that we need to get up to help move forward. And we've also, I'm very proud to have now school resource officers in our schools as well. So that has been something that I've been very pleased to have. We have 3 schools now with school resource officers. Did I hear the timer go off or no? Oh, okay. Well, I'm good. Thanks.
Sorry about that. We lost the question, but yes. So next up, I can reread the question. Scott, you're up. Basically, mental health workers have been available to police for much of the last year to assist with real-time crisis de-escalation. What other ways can you envision to bring together various parts of available city services to increase public safety?
I believe bringing safety people together with community members is a great model that we need to work on more. Since I was a kid, my view of the police is someone who drove up in a big, long, sort of tinted window, low to the ground cruiser and communicated with you from that vehicle for the most part. I think what we need to do is we need to get our police officers out of their vehicles, on foot, and on bicycles. And so I did some research into that, how effective that is throughout the country. And so police on bicycles are actually 27% more effective at reducing crime in the area that they're working than police in cruisers. One of the reasons for that is they've got access to trails and alleys and all sorts of things that you can't necessarily get to in a police car. But more importantly to me is the level of interaction and humanization that occurs when you have a real person walking down the street, somebody that you can say hello to, somebody that you can ask a question of, somebody that can have a back and forth dialogue with you. And I know I've been accused of being idealistic in that way before, but I really do believe that getting the police officers out of their car and on foot and on the streets and interacting with people is one of the keys to reducing the negative crime situation that we have in downtown.
Thank you, Scott. Alex, you're up next. I can reread the question if you'd like me to.
Please, thank you.
Yes. Mental health workers have been available to the police for much of the last year to assist with real-time crisis de-escalation. What other ways can you envision to bring together various parts of available city services to help increase public safety?
Well, we've talked a little bit about the Target team and supporting the Target team specifically with regards to their homeless outreach efforts to pair people experiencing homelessness with mental health workers and advocates that can support them in getting connected to additional services, shelter, housing, and ways to move forward with their lives. I think that's an excellent example of a true partnership between law enforcement and service providers. The mobile crisis unit, as it's been mentioned, it only operates 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And what we know about behavioral health crises is that the vast majority of them occur after the hour of 10 p.m. So I'd like to see an increased collaboration between the city and the county to expand that service so that it's available 24 hours a day. I've mentioned this already, but I want to be sure that our police force also receives de-escalation training. Although they are not required to be social workers, those skills are essential, and that they should be able to utilize those skills with or without the presence of a service provider. And the added benefit of that training is that it allows enhanced partnerships with service providers, because once crises are de-escalated, then appropriate referrals can be made to services so that the crises don't reoccur or they don't escalate again. I'm supportive, like I said, of the shelter crisis, and I believe that the inherent mechanism of declaring a shelter crisis allows us to open the door for increased collaborations with service providers. It allows us to trust their expertise in bringing projects forward to address the issue of homelessness, and that inherently enhances their voice and their seat at the table so that we can look at enhancing those collaborations. I'd also like to see the implementation of a citizen oversight committee so that issues involving police use of force and other issues regarding law enforcement can be connected not only to service providers but directly to the citizens of this community, that our police force can be informed by the citizens of our community, and that that board can act as a conduit between citizens and law enforcement to increase transparency, to increase collaboration, and to really look at creative ways of enhancing our law enforcement and our public safety response. That's all I got.
Thank you, Alex. John, you're up next. I can reread the question if you'd like me to.
Oh, I think I can remember. I see it really as kind of two questions. you've got the part of de-escalation, and then you've got the issue of just public safety at large. So let me address them both. Nobody should get shot just because they have an interaction with law enforcement. There's a lot of ways to bring a quick end to a crisis without putting a bullet into somebody. For example, if it's completely out of control, a flash bang bomb might get their attention without killing them. Rubber bullets, tasers. I think one of the things that police officers need to get more training in is how to bring a situation to an end without putting a bullet in the subject to bring it to an end. So de-escalation training is really a win-win. It's a win for law enforcement, and it's a win for the citizens, and it's probably a win for the person who doesn't get a bullet in them. Now, moving on to public safety, there's no question that people have issues with public safety. You know, you've got to not be paying attention to realize that, you park your car on virtually any street in this city right now, and there's a good chance you'll find your window broken in the morning, particularly if you've got an unopened bag sitting somewhere or something that suggests maybe there's potentially something valuable in your vehicle. Bicycles, I don't think I'd even buy a bicycle in Chico at this point. I'd rather rent one, because if you buy it, it'll probably be stolen in a week. We've reached the point where shoplifters feel like they can just walk in and steal something and say, I'm stealing, see you later, thanks, I'll be back tomorrow. All of that crap's got to end. So, we need to, people are going to feel a lot safer when we stop having so many car break-ins, when the shoplifting goes down, when people can walk some of the streets in Chico without getting knifed, beat up, or worse, which happens on a regular basis. I've lived here 40 years. I've watched things change dramatically. There was a time a long time ago where I could walk any street at 3 in the morning, and the worst I might experience is a middle finger. There's a lot of streets I don't think I'd walk at any point with the sun down. So we need to address the realities of public safety. I would advocate that in terms of shoplifting, that we require stores in our community to turn in shoplifters. I would advocate that people caught shoplifting more than once maybe ought to be doing a little bit of giving back to the community, maybe even scrubbing some of those public toilets with brushes. In short, if you have children, if you let your children do whatever they want, they generally don't have good outcomes when they grow up. We've got to stop tolerating the kind of behavior that we're all talking about tonight. Sorry, I could go on with this one too. Thank you.
And Rich, I think you're last up on this segment.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I think many of the things that have been said already, I certainly agree with. De-escalation training, we've talked a little bit about. I agree that we need to increase both foot and bike patrols. We need to have officers who are embedded in the community, visible in the community, friends with the neighbors. That I think that we could do. We've mentioned the target team. That's another way that you can do intervention. And I certainly agree that we need a more fully empowered and supported community oversight committee so that we can have real transparency and real engagement and real dialogue again between the police department and citizens and neighborhoods. I want to tell a quick little story. I think probably many of us here, perhaps all of us, have done ride-alongs with the Chico Police Department. I did that a while back. And the reason I bring that up is that it's an example of how de-escalation training, when done well, and in this case I believe this officer had internalized it, how it makes a difference. So we got a call when I was on this ride along about a person who is in crisis, a person in an apartment building over on the let's see, the south east side of town. And this person was having trouble with the landlord and was apparently in some sort of crisis. And so the landlord called the police, and we responded. I happened to just be lucky that day. And so we responded to that call, and this officer did a number of things that I think were very educational to me, at least, and it's what I believe, mean, at least in part, when we talk about de-escalation training. We knocked on the door, and the very first thing that the police officer asked, once he knew the person's name, was, "Have you eaten anything today?" And that was very much eye-opening to me, that the officer would start there. And then the officer continued on with, are you on any medication, and do you have it with you right now on your person? And then went through a series of questions. We ended up coming into the person's living room, and the officer just stood and asked a number of questions that had, to my untrained eyes, sort of very little to do with the crisis right at hand. And I think it accomplished a couple of things. It created a rapport, created a little bit of trust, and it showed that the officer understood that there were in all likelihood, underlying issues that had led to this particular crisis. We ended up talking with this person for probably half an hour. I just, of course, stood and watched. And we ended up the police officer offered to take the person to Butte County Behavioral Health, which we did, and it was a reasonable solution, a reasonable end to that particular crisis. I think that's a model of what we're talking about when we talk about de-escalation training.
Thank you, Rich. All right, well, that's the first segment of our forum. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, let everyone take some refreshments, or if our candidates want to get some refreshments, restrooms are right around the corner. We'll be back in 10 minutes with the fiscal issues facing our city, so come back in 10 minutes, please.
Support for NorCal News Now comes from David Green, your Chico Edward Jones financial advisor at 2101 Forest Avenue, Suite 120. Additional information is available at edwardjones.com. Edward Jones, making sense of investing. Member SIPC. Additional hosting for this special episode of NorCal News Now, showcasing the Chico City Council Candidates Forum, is provided by the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Congregation Beth Israel in Chico, California. We live in an age of shouting, but at our best, Americans argue out our differences, pushing ourselves compromise by compromise to a better place. That's why at NorCal News Now, we believe in a different kind of political talk show. On NorCal News Now, we welcome activists and opinion leaders, office holders and candidates from local city council members to top statewide and nationwide office seekers. We talk to them like they're humans, and we expect them to leave their talking points at the door and talk to us and our audience like we're humans too. We believe in unvarnished, in-depth, wide-ranging discussions on a whole host of different topics. Handmade in Northern California, our show is not actually handmade. We make it with professional cameras and microphones like every other broadcast show. We are, after all, not cave people. You can find NorCal News Now on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, our website, on your favorite podcast feed, and on ancient communication technologies like smoke signals and television, but not smoke signals. I think by this point you can see we're a little bit different. So give us a shot. NorCal News Now, a political talk show at the intersection of politics and real life.
All right, thank you, Chris. I wanted to mention, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the forum, we have 5 candidates here, and I appreciate everyone for being here. Thank you so much. We did invite everyone. There's 9 people running for the Chico City Council for this term, and we invited everyone. These 5 were good enough to come and give us their time, so I really appreciate that for the candidates. So Thank you for that. All right. We're going to dive in now to the second part of the forum. This one is on the fiscal issues facing the city of Chico now and in the future. And for your first question, hopefully this will work this time. All righty. The first question in this part of the forum. The city's most recent budget for fiscal year 2018-2019 checked in at a tidy 312 pages. And for those of you out there that just skimmed it maybe, you've missed a compelling read. Fascinating read. I joke a little bit, but in all honesty, I think about this a lot. I mean, I think that level of complexity makes it hard, if not impossible, really, for the average citizen to grasp, even abstractly, the financial health of the city. So how will you as a council member better communicate this important information to your constituents? And we're going to start with Scott.
Thank you. So thank goodness that we have a city staff who are experts in their various fields. We have accountants and we have people that have been working with budgets all their lives, and they're the ones that are able to sift through this information and make it intelligible for the rest of us. So because I am not a finance expert, last spring, Scott Dowell at the city provided a overview of the budget that really broke it down into sort of layman's terms, which was wonderful. And I would invite any of you to look that up. It is in the form of a PowerPoint that is on the city's website. Because it is a very complicated, long issue. The other day I was trying to figure out a certain statistic that I wanted to quote, and I couldn't find it anywhere, and I ended up calling city staff to get that figure. So in answer to the question, I think it is that we rely on the experts that we have on our staff, and we let them know that we need them to break down that information in such a manner that the entire community can understand it.
Thank you, Scott. All right. Next up is Rich. Same question.
Well, I think that, again, part of what happens is when you have something as deeply complicated as the city budget, well over $100 million annual budget, what I think that we all end up caring about are very specific pieces of that budget that we feel most directly impact, maybe our lives, whether it's, police funding or park funding or things that we just care very deeply about. And so those tend to be the things that our ears perk up on, and we say, oh, well, I'm gonna pay attention to that newspaper story or that piece of information that I'm most curious about. And so what we end up with is each of us individually, I believe, I know this is true for me in the past, what we end up with is kind of a fragmented view of budget issues as opposed to kind of a holistic view. So I think that in order to try to bring these things forward into the community, the city needs to do some real outreach, and that's going to take actual partnership with the community to show that that we all as community members, want to receive that information. So I'm thinking of things like neighborhood groups, town hall meetings, where we focus just on budgetary issues, and we actually have a full discussion out publicly, transparently in the community and say, here is the bigger picture, and here are the three things that you in this neighborhood or you as an individual care most deeply about, but we need to engage at the higher level. And one of the reasons that it's critical, I think, that we do that and that we engage, that we make it a two-way street, that the city provides that information and then that we as a community engage with that information, is that we're kind of not going to have a choice. We all have heard about the looming pension liability crisis. That's going to hit hard fairly soon. We're already beginning to see the effects of that, and in the coming years it's going to hit hard. It's a statewide issue. It's not unique to Chico. Many of the ways that we'll address it, and I suspect there's going to be a question about this later, so we'll talk about it more, I suspect, but one of the ways that we will in all likelihood address that that looming problem is at a state level. But there is clearly a role to play for the city. So when those stories start to hit, and when we really have to dig into that and make very difficult decisions about where our limited budget and where our limited resources are going to go, it will be our duty, to engage and pay attention and help those of us who are on the council make those hard decisions. And so when the city, which I hope we will do, reaches out into the community and holds things like town hall meetings and open forums where we focus on the big picture as well as the details behind it of budget issues, that we actually engage, that we provide feedback, and that we help make those critical decisions, because they're coming, and it's going to take the entire community to pull together to figure out what do we do to address that issue as well as other budgetary issues that are looming. And I bet I've gone over 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop right there.
We just noticed that. Thank you. Thank you, Rich. Andrew, same question.
All right. Well, first off, let's start in the past. Most of you probably have been in Chico more than 4 years, so you remember exactly where we were back 4 years ago, and it wasn't a pretty place. So, and that occurred both because of the economic downturn, but also because that Chico did not pay attention the way it should have been, due to, I think, some mishandling of just the way it was addressed and given to council by both the city manager at the time and the finance director at the time, that council wasn't getting a real and accurate picture of what was happening in our city. So we found out that we were $20 million in the hole, and because of that, we had a lot of services that were cut. You, like me, probably remember the headlines where Chico was lucky to even get a loan to float itself through to the next payment period. That being said, we are moving out of that past, but we have plenty of problems ahead of us. So I can tell you that I am very proud of the transparency that now takes place, that we do these not only meetings for potential candidates, but the city itself every other year holds a budget workshop where people can come and actually get all the information. And that has been due in part to City Manager Mark Orm and also Finance Director Scott Dow. And I think that's been great. When I have community groups, whether it be a Cub Scout group or a 4-H group or a group of students from one of the high schools or Chico State come into the council, and I really like bringing the youth in the council and showing them the chambers and having them learn about their democracy. But when I ask them one simple question, I could probably ask it here tonight and get just the same variety of answers, is how much do you think the budget for the city of Chico is? And they are, they toss out numbers like $1,000, which is fun. And then some say $5 trillion. But rarely do even any of the parents who accompany them realize that the city of Chico's budget is over $100 million a year. So now, of course, most of that goes to salaries. A lot of it goes into a street improvement program. It goes into public work project improvement programs that are financed over the long term. So I can say I read that agenda and I read that budget, and often for each council meeting, and I hate to break it to you guys and ladies up here, that it's 800 pages sometimes for every single council meeting. Tammy Ritter knows what I'm talking about. It's some lengthy reading, but it is important that we look at it and understand it. I can tell you, in terms of the looming budget crisis, we are looking at annual payments increasing for the city of Chico from $7 million to $13 or $14 million within just the next 5 years. And that, of course, is just using middle-of-the-road estimates. We're going to have a 27% of our budget will be eaten up by CalPERS if we maintain current projections. So it is important that we look at these issues very closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Alex.
So working in the social services field, in working within grant funding, it's an important thing for that many folks don't understand, but they can understand is that there are different line items that have to be spent in specific ways. And so, specifically with regard to the roundabout that was just put in leading into the downtown area, there were a lot of questions about where the money is going or where the money is coming from for that project to be funded when our roads are deteriorating, and why can't it go to that? So, one of the things that's important to illustrate to the community is how specific funds, where those funds are originating and how they're being spent, and how certain funds are only available to be spent on particular projects. I think that the level of communication has increased and can continue to increase with folks about how we're allocating those funds and where they're coming from. Again, I agree that we need to collaborate with our staff and the experts that we've hired to manage our finances and make recommendations to synthesize that information to be more accessible to the community, whether that's through white papers, presentations at city council meetings. And it's helpful when we're receiving reports at the city council meetings when those ideas and those funding mechanisms are broken down. I think it's helpful for the city council city councilors. It's helpful for the citizens in the community to understand where that money's coming from and how it's being spent. I also agree that holding town halls and workshops to help people better understand the key components of the budget and how it operates and how it works and how we're allocating those funds can be a key element to getting people closer to understanding where we are and where we're going.
Thank you, Alex. Finally, John.
Okay. Well, the key part of this question is how do we better communicate with the city of Chico or the residents of Chico about our economics. There's not much we need to communicate more than this. The pension crisis, which I've heard more tonight than I've heard in the last couple of years, is far beyond control. People were already broke. Right now, we spend over $500,000 each month, and it's going to double to $1 million. Then it's going to be $2 million. Then it's going to be $4 million. We talk about a $100 million total budget for the city of Chico. You know, a decade or two, the entire CalPERS thing would take the entire $100 million. We've got a problem here. If we don't fix this problem, we could double the tax revenue we get. Throw all the money that we collect as a city, have a magic wand and double it. It's not going to be enough money. We earlier on in the social part of this forum here, we talked about really some wonderful programs. Every one of those programs, particularly with the candidates here tonight, got a lot of support. And I think quite a few of them, frankly, are at their root very awesome ideas. But we're not going to be able to pay for them. We're not going to be able to support them with even the money we support them with now. You think we have problems with our roads? How about no money for roads? By the way, have your taxes gone down or have they gone up? Just ask yourself that question. Probably they've gone up because no matter how much money we get, we're dumping it down a black hole. It's called unfunded pension crisis. Nobody really wants to talk about it because it's uncomfortable, and people on the receiving end of that certainly don't want to talk about how you fix the pension crisis, but it's coming. You know, we can have the response that we've had in the city so far, which is to do absolutely nothing. Trying to work with CalPERS is like the chicken trying to debate with the fox what's for dinner. We've got a problem here, and it's out of control. So when does it stop? Does it stop at $500,000 a month? Does it stop at $750,000 a month? Does it stop at $1 million a month? What number do we say that's it, no more? When do you cut off a drug addict from the drug they're taking? And that's what we have right now is an addiction to pouring money in the CalPERS crisis because we won't stop feeding it more drugs, money. The money that would pay for all these wonderful social services, the money that'll pay to fix the roads, the money that'll put enough police out there in cars, bicycles, and on foot to stop some of the crap that we're all dealing with when we walk down the street. We need to solve this crisis. The education we need to give the public is how damn bad it is. I'm out of time because I could really go off on this one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Well, guess what? This next question deals with, surprise, surprise, a looming, no one saw these questions really, a looming financial situation that needs some urgent attention, as we've heard, as well as long-range planning involves the city's unfunded pension obligations to public employees, which for Chico represents a total commitment well beyond, I believe, $100 million. The projected price tag for 2018-2019 alone, I believe, tops $11 million. There are no good choices in terms of handling that kind of financial burden for the city. So what are the best of the bad choices? And we're going to start with Rich.
Lucky me. So we talk about choices, and we talk about what are we going to do about this particular budget problem, and it's by far the largest on the horizon, but there are other budget challenges that we're facing. There are other decisions that we need to make about how we allocate existing programs and funding, how we continue to take care of the parks and urban forest and things like that, all of which will take tough decisions on the budget. Among the bad choices that are out there for us, and I'll go back to something that the Chamber of Commerce did, which I think was actually a favor to our entire community. Many months back, the Chamber of Commerce floated the idea of a sales tax. I don't know that a sales tax is a great idea. I think that typically sales taxes are regressive taxes, and I think that's problematic. However, so I don't know, and certainly a sales tax is not going to get us out of the pension crisis. We can't tax our way out of this problem. But what the favor that I believe that the Chamber did for us was allowed us to start talking about the revenue side of this equation, and allowed us to say, well, we need to look at ourselves as a community and figure out where our priorities are, and are we willing to look, internally and find solutions to some of these problems that may include some very uncomfortable, difficult decisions. So I think now that we can include that part of the conversation, that's helpful. Again, I would not argue that certainly a sales tax or tax increases are the way to solve this pension problem. It's not. But we need to be able to have conversations that include the revenue side. We need to look at things like the cannabis industry. We need to look at places where we're falling behind in the region, cannabis being the most obvious example. Other communities who are generating revenue right now. And again, that by itself won't fix this particular problem. This problem is too big to be fixed by any one of these solutions. But when we have this conversation in the community, we need to be able to talk about a whole host of solutions, as opposed to, it's like bringing a set of tools to a job. If you leave a bunch of your tools behind, then you're likely to not do a good job of whatever the project is. We need to bring all of these tools forward when we have a conversation about how to address this. So I think they're going to be very, very tough decisions, and those decisions need to be made openly and collaboratively, and we need to start doing that work right away.
Thank you, Rich. Next is John.
All right. Imagine this. We're talking about pensions. Well, number one way that you stop this problem is you stop having conversations about taxing us all more before we solve the problem. The problem is solved by stop giving more money month after month after month. If we draw a line at the 2018-2019 budget based on the number up there, that's about $1 million a month. So we could draw a line and say, that's it, $1 million a month. We're not coughing up anymore. We're going to have to find a different solution. We're not going to find a solution by begging the people that we give the money to stop. We're going to have to take some action. And it's not going to be normal, day-to-day, this is how we've done it before. We need to make a stand. That's it. We're not going to come up with any more money. I'm not suggesting for one moment that we go backwards. But the first thing you do when you're in a hole and you want to get out is you stop digging. And we're digging. We're digging at an exponential rate. It won't be long before we're so damn far in the hole, there is no out other than filing bankruptcy. In fact, that's possible. We're already there and we just don't want to admit it. I don't know that, but it's bad. So there's no business to talk about tax, no business to talk about any increased revenue, which no matter how you look at it is going to come out of your pockets when we don't have a solution to the unfunded pension crisis. Only then should we have a conversation. When we stop the amount of money escalating that's going to unfunded pensions, if we still need money at that point for social services, for parks, for schools, heck, for a party in downtown Chico, I don't care. We can have that conversation, but we cannot have that conversation until we stop the narcotic of just coming up with more and more and more money every month. And that's what it is. Every month, it's more money than the month before. Where do you draw the line? If you don't like $1 million a month, you tell me. $2 million a month? $4 million a month? $8 million a month? How much would $1 million a month do for victims of domestic violence? Imagine if we didn't have to go from $1 million a month to $2 million a month. We could do a lot with $1 million for social services. So here's the choice. Do we keep funding unstopping numbers with pensions, or do we draw a line in the sand and start using our money for things that are probably more important, like social services, parks, schools, police, safety? It's a choice. And it's time we demand that our leaders start making that choice. Not later, not now, immediately. Did I hear the chime?
Thank you, John.
Can I have another 3 minutes?
All right, next up, Alex.
So, I mean, this isn't just an issue impacting the city of Chico. This is a statewide crisis that we're experiencing, and the city has been, responsive in the best bad way possible by putting aside $1 million of funds in a pension stabilization trust to begin addressing the pension crisis in our community. It's not enough, it's not nearly enough, but it is a step in the right direction to set aside funding that can only be allocated to addressing our unfunded liabilities. Another key piece of this is transparent public communication with community input related to this issue. It is looming, and it is a big concern that's going to hit our community hard, and we need to be engaging in critical dialogue with our city staff, with our financial experts on the city level, and sharing that information about the impacts of this with our community and getting their input as well. It may be all for naught, but we should continue our negotiations with CalPERS to address the crisis at a statewide level, and be thoughtful in our contracts moving forward so that this issue doesn't, or we can minimize the impact of the issue on future generations. I agree we should be looking at revenue with regards to the cannabis industry, with regards to investments in arts and culture activities, because additional money to our city is additional opportunity to deal with the issues facing our city.
Thank you, Alex. Next up, Andrew.
So let me preface this by saying I'm a fifth-generation Californian and I love my state. But if Chico wasn't in California, we'd be doing a lot better. So, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, in terms of the CalPERS crisis, and it is absolutely a crisis. The problem with the crisis is no one's paying attention to it, including the state legislature and the governor. They're not addressing it. They're not dealing with it. Chico actually has its $120 million in unfunded pension liabilities. It's a huge amount of money. We set aside, I believe council set aside, and again, across the board, both sides of the aisle, I think about $1.5 million at the last budget. We will probably do that again actually at this next meeting on Tuesday, or at least some funds into the investment fund. So basically we are putting money in, but we're talking about $1 million or $2 million into a fund that is going to be $120 million in debt. And Unfortunately, it is not something we can stop paying. We cannot leave the CalPERS system, because if you do, you immediately, according to the state of California, have to pay your entire amount, which basically no city is able to do. Or you can declare bankruptcy and certainly go that route. In fact, current projections put half the cities and counties in the state of California, if the pension crisis keeps moving in the direction it is, says that over half of the cities and counties in our state will be bankrupt by 2025. So this will come to a head, absolutely. You know, of course, a lot of these are promises we made, I can say. And again, I give credit to the council before I was on it. They made substantial cuts to CalPERS and the amounts that employees had to put in versus the amounts that were formally required. So they did make some of those tough changes. It has been reduced across the board, but it is still a ever widening hole. And in that respect, both Alex and John are right on multiple levels of what they've said. How to solve it, there is no easy way. It's using money that we don't have, saving it in a conservative investment fund to grow our way out of it, and hoping that the state also does their job and works on this issue as well, instead of just praying that the stock market goes really well for the next 10 years. So we all know what happened in CalPERS when the economy sank, and that's pretty much why this problem has come to a head over the last 6 or 7 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, Scott.
The challenge of just stopping paying money into CalPERS is that there's a real human factor there. We're talking about people's pensions. We're not just talking about some nameless, faceless place that we're putting money. So imagine, if you will, if somebody said that they're going to cut your retirement that you've worked your whole life for, or they're going to cut your Social Security that you've relied on, that you've counted on your whole life. So it would be wonderful if it was as simple as just stopping, but just stopping disrespects and puts a lot of people in harm's way of their retirement. So I wouldn't advocate just stopping paying CalPERS. So as has been stated, we're already trying a number of things. The city's got what's called a Section 115 trust, which is setting some money aside. Clearly, it's not going to take care of the whole problem. We have been negotiating with our labor groups, with our employees, to take lower pensions, and in a lot of cases they have agreed to that, which is very helpful to us. Our new employees, we've changed our hiring so that we're not offering the same level of pension that we have in the past. But I think really the key is, as Andrew brought up, with as many California cities that are poised to go bankrupt in the next 8 years, I believe that the solution has not presented itself yet, because as the state gets closer to seeing that level of bankruptcy among its cities, the state is going to come up with some help for us to get through this. So I'm not putting it off on the state. It's our problem. We've got to try to solve it. But as you can hear from everyone here, it's an unsolvable problem based on what we have to work with at this time. So we're going to need the state to come through, and that's going to be part of our solution.
Thank you, Scott. All right, for our third question within the fiscal issues, Chico. It's a great community. Many of us, all of us know that. It's wonderful outdoor activities, a vibrant cultural scene, and an active and increasingly diverse populace. What it doesn't have is a lot of really great jobs in fields like technology, business services, and/or advanced manufacturing. So what can we do to encourage more businesses in sectors such as these to start companies in Chico, or to move here from wherever else they may be? First up is John.
Okay, there's kind of two parts to this. The first part is that, you know, when companies come here to look around and see whether or not this might be a nice community to relocate, the first thing that we probably don't want them to see is people laying around in their own waste, vomiting, sick, and otherwise making an unattractive first impression. Now, getting that aside for a moment, assuming that we can give them a beautiful first impression, what brings business to a community is the ability to easily set up business without lots of hassles. Right now, for example, let's just say you're in the business of constructing houses. Not that that's a technology thing, but it can take you 2 to 3 years before you get to put a shovel to the ground. And as Andrew alluded from city numbers, it's at least $60,000 before you can put a shovel to the ground. To start a business, I just started a business this week that took me several years to get permission from the city. It's just a couple of card tables in the back of a bar. This is a really, really tough city to conduct business in. You've got to, kiss the brass ring of a whole lot of officials, pay a whole lot of money, and spend a whole lot of time. A lot of businesses, most businesses are all about making money. And time is money, and if you spend your time going around kissing all the brass rings, paying the fees, and burning up time, eventually you say F it, and you move on to a more inviting environment. So what can we do? First of all, I think we should be working with our high schools to make sure that we are training our youngsters with skills they can actually use for today's jobs. I think we should consider trying to lobby Chico State to become maybe a polytech school where we get more focus on high tech skills. If we're graduating people from the school with those type of skills, the employers are going to follow. I mean, right now we've got an employment situation that we're kind of blessed with. We've got more jobs out there than we've got workers to fill them. So, if we were graduating a ton of people with high-tech, high-paying jobs, then, that's an incentive for employers of those type of fields to be here. So let's make it easy for those employers to be here. Let's give them some incentive to be here, not disincentive. That's what makes sense to me, and that's all I have to say on it at this point.
Thanks, John. Next up, Andrew.
So there is a lot more that we can do. We don't have an economic development director within the city any longer. We need to push that forward. The city manager pretty much takes on that role. So as we move forward, that is something that we absolutely need to have. Someone who is active and at least one employee, if not an entire department of people who share the goodness of Chico with businesses throughout the state and throughout the country. We also, John has a point, we do need to maintain a clean and safe city. That's certainly important as employers look at us. Chico State is certainly a benefit to us. One of the things that I pushed through Butte County Association of Governments, which honestly has fallen on deaf ears, is we need to push for 4-lane access to I-5. I can tell you we are one of the largest, if not the largest city in the United States not connected to an interstate. So let's think about that for a second. We're one of the largest towns in the entire United States not connected to an interstate highway. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it, that we are doing so well and blossoming so well without being connected to that major hub of transportation. And that doesn't even count air service. But before air service, I'd love to see 4 lanes over, although air service is important. I loved it when we had it. Want to get it back. We are making efforts to do that. But that 4 lanes to I-5 would be hugely important to this community, both on the manufacturing side as well as a variety of other issues too. We're also having an influx of people from the Bay Area moving up to Chico. And they want services. They want shopping. They want things along those lines. We have had some great companies. I believe we have somebody up here, Scott, who works for them. At least last time I checked, build.com. So we do have some very good tech companies in town, and it is something that we need to push for. But I can tell you the city of Chico is always worried about losing Build.com. The city of Chico is always worried about losing the companies we have already, fleeing to other states where the tax burden is lower. So there's a lot we can continue to do. There's a lot the state of California can do to help us as well. And I think we need to push for the 4-lane access to the interstate, as well as move forward with an economic development director within the city as the funds become available.
Thank you, Andrew. Next is Rich.
So I've spent my entire career in Chico for 24 years working in the technology sector. For a time, I was vice president of communications for a company called SunGuard. I'm currently communications manager for a technology company, software company called EXL. That experience for those 24 years working exactly in this industry has provided me with an education on this in terms of the fluidity of the workforce that we have in Chico between the technology companies that we have. And there's a lot of technology work being done in companies that we don't think of as technology companies. So Lulu's, for example, Lulus.com, has a huge workforce that's working on infrastructure, technology, security, programming, web management, things like that. Sierra Nevada has a huge technology component. And so there are a lot of jobs in Chico in traditional software companies, kinds of companies that I've spent my career with, as well as in other companies that, again, we don't typically think of as technology companies. In my experience in those 24 years, leading teams, hiring people, occasionally having to lay off people, my experience there has demonstrated a couple of things to me, at least, in how we address this. One is that we need to make sure that we need to understand who our competition is when we're looking to bring more of those kinds of jobs. Our competition is Sacramento and the Bay Area. So when we're trying to get workers of this type to come to Chico, they're making those kinds of choices. Portland as well. So we need to understand sort of who our competition is. We also need to understand fully where those jobs really are and how to support the companies that are employing those kinds of people. There are a couple of things that I think are most important to attracting and keeping that kind of workforce in Chico. One is affordable housing of a diverse mixture. So not just 3, 4, and 5 bedroom houses, but single unit dwelling, apartment complexes, smaller houses, so that young professionals who are at the beginning of their careers in the technology field and have decent salaries, but aren't at the top of their earning potential, and so can't afford to be moving into and don't have the need to be in a big house. We need to have that kind of housing stock, and we have a shortage of that kind of housing stock as well as others in Chico. The other thing that I think is really critical is bringing air service back to Chico. All of these companies that I'm talking about have relied for years and used extensively for years the Chico Municipal Airport. When that service went away, that had a dramatic impact on not just the convenience, but the bottom line of these companies, spending much more money sending people to Sacramento to fly in and out. And so we need to make sure we address that problem too.
Thank you, Rich. Scott.
So John is not incorrect about the impression that a big homeless population downtown has for out-of-town visitors who are thinking of coming here, and we absolutely do need to solve that. We need to solve that with things like housing for those people and making sure that they have an option other than right in the middle of downtown for spending their daytime hours. But if you do a search of factors that make a community attractive to employers, you'll find that there are repeatedly the same qualities that they're looking for. One is affordable housing. Affordable housing, as Rich brought up, in terms of workforce housing, a place that their some of their entry-level and modest income employees can live. We don't currently have that. We don't have 0 to 1 bedroom units that are affordable. We could be incentivizing those. There's been an ongoing discussion of impact fees. It's been requested of the City Council a number of times that we reduced impact fees for 0 to 1 bedroom units, and it's been regularly turned down. Primarily, I believe, because the developers want to build 4 and 5 bedroom houses. They don't want to build little houses. So affordable housing and workforce housing is number 1. High performing schools. So making sure that we're backing up our school district in its efforts to do the very best they can with our students. Rich brought up air carriers. So there was a study done of the Chico metropolitan service area, which includes Chico, Oroville, Paradise, and Gridley, which demonstrated that we could be filling 2 inbound and 2 outbound planes daily, 682 passengers. That's the number that we need to attract an air carrier, a commercial air carrier to Chico. And I work at a company, a tech company, that we have people come in and out of Sacramento. They fly into Sacramento, rent a car, and drive to Chico 2-3 times a week. It's not sustainable. The businesses don't like to have people drive for an hour and a half in a rental car to get to where they are. So we need to support those efforts to get that air service started here. The 4th issue is ample recreation. So we absolutely need to be investing in our park. We did a park survey this year that disclosed a number of things about the park that could make it more attractive to people and could help it finance the overloving that we're doing of it. And if you spend much time in the park, you can tell that it's overloved. You know, the grassy trails are beaten to the ground. Last one, it is an investment in public art. Public art is very important to attracting people to our community.
Thank you, Scott. And Alex.
So I agree that we need to reinstate commercial air service to Chico and collaborate, especially with the larger businesses in town and in the surrounding communities, to ensure that those flights are filled and that reinstatement can be sustainable long term. I also think that we need to open up to new industries. And one of the industries that I'd like to see the city open up to is the cannabis industry. We have the opportunity to start homegrown businesses in Chico by regulating cannabis in our community, and that will free up opportunities for jobs at multiple levels. I agree with some of my colleagues here who have addressed taking care of and addressing the issue of affordable housing in our community. We need to incentivize the development of housing that is affordable to the people who choose to live here and choose to work here and choose to come here and call Chico their home. I'm a product of Chico State. Did my undergraduate and my master's degree here, and chose to stay and chose to invest my skills and my education in this community. We have additional opportunity to collaborate with Chico State and other campuses to increase mentorship programs and do workforce development training so that we can decrease the amount of brain drain that happens with the people we educate in this community and inspire and encourage them to stay here and invest those skills here just like I have. I also agree that investing in arts and culture is a key element to establishing Chico as the arts leader that we are and enhancing our presence as an arts and community or an arts and culture city. That is what makes people feel proud to be here. It gives people opportunity to engage with our culture in the city in a new way, and that investment enriches the community that we live in. I also agree in investing in economic development staff and utilizing our partnerships with Chico State to perhaps conduct studies on economic development and work with them to see how we can maximize our potential as a city.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, well, we are going to take a few questions from the audience. Now, these questions were submitted to me in advance, and I am going to pose them to you. Same deal. We'll each get 3 minutes to answer these questions. We'll randomize it. So the first question from the audience came from Karen Rogers, And Karen would like to ask about Proposition 10, which is also known as the Local Rent Control Initiative. And that would repeal the 2-decade-old Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act and allow municipalities like Chico to adopt rent control. So what's your view of the potential efficacy of Prop 10 as a tool to improve the affordability of housing? I should probably advance that so you guys can all see that. There you go.
Would you entertain just going to 1 minute answers? For the sake of time.
Sure. Yeah, we're past 8. Let's do. How about 90 seconds? How about that? Because we have one other question after this. So we'll go 90 seconds. Good call. Okay. 90 seconds. Yeah, 90 seconds. And we're going to start with John on that one. We're going to start with John. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, I'm way against Proposition 10. Proposition 10 is theft. It's the theft of your house. If you own a house and you don't have the right to say how much you're going to rent it out for, then you don't own it. The government owns it. If somebody else, nameless, particularly an unelected board, tells you what you can charge for a property you purchased, and we already know it's hard to buy property, we're talking about affordable housing, well, nobody's going to build houses if they can't make money. This is not going to help the housing crisis. What's going to help the housing crisis is making it easier to build houses. The people that build houses and apartments don't build them because they are humanitarians. They build them for profit. So let's make it profitable for them to build these properties by removing impediments to build it. Proposition 10, trust me, will take your home away from you. Piece by piece by piece, you won't own it anymore. Somebody else will say what it's worth, how much you can charge for it, when you can charge for it. In fact, they'll be able to control it even when it's empty and tell you what you can charge the next person. So I guess you get the impression. I think Proposition 10 is one of the worst pieces of garbage I've ever seen on the ballot.
Thank you, John. Next, Alex. Same 90 seconds.
Rent control can be an effective tool in certain communities, specifically larger cities who have no way of getting a handle on the rising costs of living in those communities and are pushing specifically marginalized communities out of their cities. It's absolutely a viable tool for cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. For the city of Chico, we can address our housing crisis in different ways and that don't require instituting rent control in our community. We've talked about a few of them today. Single room occupancy or SRO units, mixed use development that includes affordable housing, commercial and residential living dwellings. We can focus on dense development, so building up, not out, building smaller units that are more affordable to the people who live and work here. We can incentivize the development of affordable housing in our community by waiving or deferring fees for developers who choose to develop a certain number or percentage of affordable units in those developments and making it worth, investing in those types of developments. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and we need to utilize those tools, and effective intervention in the housing crisis will utilize those. We don't need rent control in Chico.
Alex. Next is Scott.
San Francisco can't grow anymore. So for a city like San Francisco, rent control makes sense. There's no way with the rising cost of rents, that people that are low and modest income can afford to stay there. Chico, on the other hand, does have room to grow. I'd like to see Chico grow internally with infill as much as possible. What I don't want to see is Chico continually expanding our outer perimeter into the hinterlands. What's called vertical growth. I think that the time has come that there are people in Chico who now have accepted that they would rather see us grow up than grow out. Can we maintain the same charm that we've always had in Chico with taller buildings. I believe there are examples of that out there. I think that the 3-story units out there at Doe Mill neighborhood are acceptable, and we can certainly make them architecturally fit within the standards for our community. So I do think rent control is a good thing for big cities. I don't think that we need rent control for Chico.
Thank you, Scott. Andrew.
Thank you. I oppose it.
Rich.
So, rent control, we have to understand kind of where this came from. And I think it's important to understand the language of Prop 10. So Prop 10 says that cities would be allowed to implement rent control. It doesn't mean that they will be required to implement rent control. So if Prop 10 is passed, then that doesn't mean automatically Chico suddenly has rent control. It means that cities bigger than Chico, cities primarily in the Bay Area and Southern California, have that option. And so I think it's important that we understand that when we have this conversation. And so I would agree. I think it's a tool that's important for cities in the Bay Area and in Southern California. I don't think it's a tool that Chico should or will choose to use. I think that there are ways, and we've talked about them several times tonight, there are ways that we can incentivize the kind of housing stock, construction of housing stock that we really want. We need more walkable and bikeable communities. We need a larger percentage of our stock to be in smaller units. We need to have mechanisms in place where we can make sure that that there's enough stock for students to live affordably. Right now, there's actually the housing crisis that we're talking about and homelessness that we're talking about. We need to understand how that impacts Chico State and Butte College students so dramatically, because there are so many students who are at housing risk, who are living in, who are couch surfing, living in cars, things like that. So rent control in Butte County and in Chico is not the fix to all of that. All of these other solutions are the fix to that.
Thank you, Rich. All right, we have one final question of the night, and this one comes to us from Jeremy Miller. This is a rather long one, so I'll read it to you. Our city has serious infrastructure issues. One example is lane and crosswalk striping. Near my daughter's school, the crosswalk paint and adjacent lane striping at the intersection of East and Cussack Avenues is almost entirely gone, creating an unsafe situation for drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians. This is a personal issue for me, as I was struck by a car at this intersection last year while stopped on my bike in the left-hand turn lane. The lack of clear striping was a contributing factor. This is a theme repeated all over the city. I contacted the traffic engineering department, and they told me that while infrastructure projects such as restriping are a top priority, they simply have not been allocated the funds to complete these projects. If elected, what will you do to enable these most basic of infrastructure projects to move forward with the goal of improving the safety of Chico? And we're going to start with Scott.
Brendan Ottoboni, who is the head of public works for the city, in a meeting with him a few months ago, he stated that the only thing that's keeping our roads even passable right now is the state gas tax. It makes up the lion's share of the little bit of money that we have left to try to offset the $188 million that we are behind on road repairs. And so I would lump this into that same category: striping, crosswalks, all that sort of thing. The reason, well, if the gas tax is repealed, you can kiss those repairs goodbye. So the first and foremost thing that we should do is we should all refuse to vote for repealing the gas tax. We need that gas tax money in this city. The second thing we should do is, we haven't really talked about taxes and bonds much in this meeting yet, but there doesn't appear to be any other way for us to get out of this hole for road repairs other than having a discussion about all of the options that are available to solve it. And those include taxes, bonds, property taxes.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
John, you're up.
Well, it's a matter of money, isn't it? Right now, or at least for the 2018-2019 budget, we're talking about $1 million a month for unfunded pensions. A couple of years from now, it'll be $2 million a month. I've got a feeling that if we cut that line at $1 million a month and stop, I'm not suggesting that we stop paying CalPERS, I'm just suggesting we stop paying them more, then perhaps we can use our ever-increasing tax base to paint some stripes on the road. Really, this is what it comes down to. There's only so much money. We can either give the money to unfunded pensions and keep digging up more and more and more so we don't have anything left for anything else, or we can say enough. You only get this much for unfunded pensions and we get this much for roads. Why don't we make our roads the top priority instead of unfunded pensions? Why don't we make our parks the priority instead of unfunded pensions? Why don't we make public safety a priority instead of unfunded pensions? I don't know why, but I can tell you that if I'm on the council, I will never vote to increase your taxes until this black hole sucking all the money more and more every month is closed. That's when we have that conversation and not before then, because otherwise there's never going to be enough money. Why do you think we're not painting the roads right now? We have more money this year than we had the year before and the year before. Your taxes have gone up, not down. It's just where we're spending the money. I guess I'm getting shut down here.
Thank you, John. Rich, you're up.
So the problem's been identified. It's a deficit in funding. We know that what the hole is. It's a $188 million hole. We've gone, because of Prop 6, because of the gas tax revenue, we've gone from approximately $1 million a year going to road maintenance to approximately $2 million a year. That means that hole will get bigger at a slower rate. It doesn't mean that we're actually addressing the gap. So I think that it's, again, a matter of priorities. The question has to do with striping. I think that in order to provide that kind of basic core city service, we're going to have to look at things like perhaps a bond measure. We're going to have to look at a careful allocation of the trash hauler franchise fees and making sure that those are going to the right places and that we have the right contracts in place with the waste haulers so that that revenue is adequate to or is commensurate with what it should be. I also do think that we should broaden our definition of infrastructure. We talked earlier a lot about public safety, and I think that infrastructure, I'm not going to have time to talk about that. Maybe I will at the end.
All right, Alex, you're up.
Yeah, when it comes to these projects, safety should always be the priority, and our Public Works Department is working incredibly hard to address these conditions with the funding that is available. And unfortunately, given the nature of the lack of funding, we have to prioritize projects based on severity and need. And safety should always be at the top of that list in terms of addressing those issues. The gas tax has been mentioned. Without it, we lose funding. Completely lose funding that is essential to addressing some of these road repairs and road conditions, and it increases the possibility and the likelihood of deferring maintenance and having to make the hard decision of prioritizing certain projects over other ones. Our waste franchise agreements is money that can and should be spent on repairing our roads. The reality is these conditions are going to get worse over time and become more severe and become more costly over time if we don't address them. So we do need to look at ways that we can generate revenue to address them in addition to maintaining the functions that are currently in place, whether that's instructing our Public Works Department to aggressively pursue project-specific grants, looking at revenue generation for the entire city, like opening up to cannabis commerce and supporting the arts as a revenue-generating measure.
Thank you, Alex. Andrew.
All right. I actually live over by Cusick and East in that neighborhood. So I can tell you this is that, we have 562 lane miles of roadway in the city of Chico. And it's getting worse, as we all know, every single day. So the reason why, though, is actually pretty simple. You need good leadership to make sure these roads go well. I can tell you what we've had is we had a budget crisis in 2013, which, because we were not preparing in an economic downturn, that ate up $20 million. We had a lawsuit back in the early 2000s over the Humboldt Road burn dump that cost the city $20 million. That's $40 million that we are behind in the city of Chico. I can tell you, $40 million for our roads would bring them right up to par. So, in fact, a bond of about $40 million is exactly what the city's finance committee is looking at. And that's Randall Stone and Mark Sorensen and Sean Morgan all sat down, said, we need to explore the bond issue in order to possibly fix our roads on the possibility that SB1 funds are going away. Problem I have with SB1 funds, not sure if I can fit this in, is that takes more money from us than it gives to us. We are spending more through our gas taxes on money going to places like LA and San Francisco than this coming here. So I'd rather have that money come here.
All right, well, we're going to get ready to conclude our forum. Before we do that, I want to let everyone have 1 minute for a concluding remark. So we'll do our randomizer. Rich, you're first up. 1 minute.
Well, again, thank you all for being with us tonight and engaging in this conversation. It'd be nice if it were a true conversation, but there's time for that as we go along the way. Again, I'm asking for your support and your vote for one core reason that we actually haven't talked much about tonight, and that is that I believe that we need to change the tone of our civic discourse. I think that one of the reasons that these issues that we're talking about tonight are so difficult in Chico is that we've seen at the City Council a deep division and deep polarization where we no longer are seeing our council members actually engage in real dialogue and real conversation. And only when we do that can we actually start to see progress and do the real work that will address the things that we're talking about tonight. I'm all about communication. My career has always been about that, and I desperately want to bring a change in the way that we actually work together as a city, the way that the council interacts with the community when the community comes to address the council. We need to change that tone so that we can get real work done. So I'd appreciate your vote. Thanks very much.
Next up, Ken.
He doesn't have much to. He doesn't have much to say tonight.
Sorry, Scott.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. It's, I think, one of the things that's been so wonderful about this campaign for me is getting out and meeting people and sharing ideas and hearing ideas from the other side. And that, to me, that's very important. That has to happen with our city council, is that sharing of ideas. Because what we've been seeing, at least for the last year, and I've been to every one but 2 city council meetings for the last year, is we see people on one side in the audience speaking, but we never really hear back dialogue, conversation from the other side. What we need to do is create an environment at these city council meetings where information goes both ways. It's just not us talking to a bunch of heads up there, but it's us actually having a conversation. That's what I'll advocate for.
So thank you again for hosting this forum. This has been one of the more exciting, diverse forums that we've attended, and I really appreciate the organization and the ability to answer questions that I haven't had the chance to answer. Again, my name's Alex Brown, and a big reason why I chose to run is because I wanted to affect change at a larger scale in this community. I've been invested here since I moved here in 2008, and I want to use my skills and my education and my background to move this city city forward in a smart and strategic way. What I love about running at this time is that the rooms of people who have been engaged in these issues and engaged politically have grown, and that people are more inspired and more active than ever to participate in local, state, and national politics. This is why I'm doing this, and that kind of energy is what keeps me going and motivated to connect with as many people as possible about the issues impacting our city. I'm Alex Brown. I'm asking for your vote on November 6th, and I would love to talk with you more about the issues that matter to me and to our city.
Thank you, Alex. Andrew.
Well, thank you to CBI for hosting, and thank you for everyone for being here tonight, too. I really appreciate your interest. I can tell you when I was doing this 4 years ago, we did not have nearly as many people at the forums I spoke at. You know, when you make this decision, I just encourage you to realize that this is your city, that we have a budget, again, in excess of $100 million, and the importance of choosing qualified managers to look after those funds and to ensure that they are spent correctly and securely and safely into the future. You know, I can say that as a council member for the last 4 years, my priority has always been public safety. I've worked to restore the police department numbers through efforts of the council and again across the council to restore those numbers back to 95 plus officers from their low in 2013 of just 65. I'd like to see our fire department restored to recommended staffing levels, which it is not at and has not been at for the last year and a half since we lost the SAFER grant. As the author of the Chico Safe Now proposals, I am pushing for safer community across the board, and I would appreciate your support in the upcoming election. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And John.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you that if your criteria for picking the 3 votes you're going to make is people that care about the city, you've got a pretty tough choice. Because everybody up here, diverse as the opinions are, cares deeply about the city of Chico. In fact, I'll even say that about the candidates that couldn't find their way in here tonight. Now, that being said, I'm not going to ask you to vote for me. I'm going to ask you to vote for the issues. You've heard us talk about the issues tonight, and there's been several different versions of how we might go about solving some of those issues. And that's what you should vote for, not for the people. Pick the people that are going to represent the issues the best. That's who you should vote for. So no, I'm not asking for your vote. I'm asking you to really think about who's going to defend your money the best, who's going to defend your interest. And right now, keep something in mind. Bonds are like taxes. It's not free money. We're going to have to pay it back with interest. Until we take care of the black hole that's sucking all the money, there's not going to be money for anything else. Every one of you knows it's true. It's just time that we start facing that truth.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you all for coming to the forum tonight. Well, hold on one second. I wanted to thank all of you for your great questions and for your attendance, of course. I wanted to thank CBI for hosting. Thanks to the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee for helping out as well and hosting. And I want to encourage everyone, of course, to please register, please vote on November 6th. Very important. I think it's the most important thing we do as citizens of this great republic is to vote. So please vote. And now, please give a great round of applause to all of our candidates. Yes. And for all of you watching at home, please watch us on Facebook and YouTube on NorCal News Now. Thanks. Good night.
Support for NorCal News Now comes from David Green, your Chico Edward Jones financial advisor at 2101 Forest Avenue, Suite 120. Additional information is available at edwardjones.com. Edward Jones, making sense of investing. Member SIPC. Additional hosting for this special episode of NorCal News Now, showcasing the Chico City Council Candidates Forum, is provided by the Domestic Violence Awareness Committee. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Congregation Beth Israel in Chico, California.